This is a brainchild of Phil Lewis and 2MUN, 1999. A day of education to share ideas, experiences, knowledge and fellowship among amateur radio operators. Thank you, Phil, if you're in the room. Okay. The other people I want to thank is Chairman Tom Karuba, if he's in here, and his committee. They're never here when you want them. Okay, you want to thank them. They put this all together over a past year. Again, another year worth of planning stages to get everything right, or try to get everything right as best you can. I think they did an outstanding job. The committee was great. I'd like to thank everybody again for coming here. One thing I want to know is how many ARRL members do we have here? Could you raise your hand? Okay, that's pretty good. How many are not ARRL members? Raise your hand. Come see the table. There's Mike's there. Come see Mike. Absolutely. That's the key issue. Okay. As we go forward, how many life members? There's a lot of them. That's pretty good. That's great. Congratulations. All right. As we continue on, I'd also like to thank Great South Bay Amateur Radio Club for sponsoring this event again this year. The president, John Melfi, W2HCB, I don't know if he's in the room or not. He was too busy eating candy or cookies or whatever. They did a great job. And also like to thank Briarcliff College for the venue. They did a great job. You know, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker here. I got to give you a couple of things, though. I called Mike the other day. I tried to call him, can't get him. He's too busy. I tried to contact him at Centennial. He was doing the club radio station, K1HO, right up there, and I couldn't get a hold of him. But anyway, I sent him an email. I said, Mike, you know, I got to do an introduction for you at HRU for your keynote speaker address. So he says, no problem. I'll send you some stuff. So I got some stuff. I got pages and pages and pages of stuff to tell me all about his heroics and his good deeds and stuff. I said, you know what? All right. Yeah, all lies. But let me tell you, Mike has been with the ARRL for 4 years as a ARRL Emergency Preparedness Manager. Some of his major responsibilities include addressing the development and implementation of an organizational disaster response plan, as well as an operational continuity plan, with over 20 years experience in emergency communications. Licensed since 1988, he's been involved with Skywarn since 91. He's attended basic and advanced Skywarn training. He's the author of the ARRL Storm Spotter Handbook. He's also editor of the Amateur Radio Public Service Handbook, which, if you don't have it, that is a hell of a book. As one of the greatest books that he has out, and one of the best ones for amateur radio emergency services. It's got a lot of information. I worked with Mike on many occasions, and most recently the ARRL Centennial in Hartford. This past July, he has a strong passion for public service as well as CW contesting when he's not on the clock. It's my privilege and honor to present our speaker for today, Mike Corey, KI1U. Again.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I've never been accused of operating QRP, um, but I do have a bit of a sore throat, so you'll have to pardon me if I gotta kind of hydrate a little bit as I go. So, being just after New Year's, and I got to share a little bit of a New Year's story with you. I came down actually yesterday morning. My girlfriend joined me, and she's out shopping right now, so please donate because I may be broke. We came down yesterday morning and we went into the city and played tourist for a little while. And I took the obligatory picture of me on Times Square, and I shared it with a bunch of friends online. And I offered them this advice, Happy New Year or Happy 2015 from Times Square. The crowd really isn't bad, and if you wait a few days before you go. But along the lines of New Year's, everybody's big about making New Year's resolutions, and they always make resolutions that they can't stick with. Well, I decided to go a little bit different. I made a resolution to give up PowerPoint for 2015. So I will be speaking from notes instead. So hopefully nobody is too hooked on PowerPoint and doesn't mind me just speaking from notes. So the first thing, I want to give you a little bit of background about me. Jim gave you my background. Some of that he said was true. Others not so true. The greatest book and all that good. I think that might be overstated, but we are very proud of the public service handbook that came out. Oh, you did get that check. Okay. So a little bit of background. I grew up in a ham radio family. My grandparents, my parents, one uncle, all the family friends were all hams. So ham radio goes back in our family about the mid-50s or so. I was actually 7 years old before I realized that not everybody has a call sign. It's interesting at Christmas time filling out the tags and you're using call signs instead of names. But I got licensed at 14, 1988, and over the 26 years or so that I've been licensed, I found amateur radio to be a hobby that, and I know there are folks that say hobby, resource, service, whatever. I'll use them all interchangeably because there are certain components to each one. But I found it to be a hobby that it is nearly impossible to get bored with because there is just so much to do. And it's one that no matter how long you've been licensed, there is always something new to try. And just in the last few years, two things that I've started trying new was satellite contacts. I know AMSAT was in here just before me. The satellite contacts, the first contact I made was on AO27 before it crapped out. And I'll tell you, learning how to do a satellite QSO was like being a novice all over again. It was a whole different ball game than what I was used to. And the other thing I've tried, and this is something that I always pitch, is also one of the things that that has taught me more lessons about emergency preparedness than anything else is radio expeditions or de-expeditions. Diane's here, and her and George and I and several others were over in the Azores a couple years ago for the 9 Islands hunt, and a few years before that I was in Curacao when they declared independence and became a new DXCC entity. If ever you want to hear a pileup, be one of the first stations on the air from a brand new DXCC entity. Everybody in the world is calling you. But what that has taught me is the value of getting the most bang for your buck out of the equipment you have. We talk about the shoestring sort of setups, 100 watts and a dipole at 20 feet. And I know in a de-expedition environment that doesn't work. I also know in an emergency or a disaster that doesn't work. It may get by in a pinch for a little while, but when you really need it, you've got to go with the most efficient station that you can put on the air. And I've learned that primarily through these expeditions. Each year I go up to an island off the coast of Canada and operate from there, so it's whatever I can fit in the car is all I can take with me, and you quickly try to figure out what works and what doesn't. You leave what doesn't work back at home. So with that, over these years, I've had a few call signs from different places. I was trying to figure it out the other day, and I come up with about 3 dozen different call signs, 2 or 3 dozen different call signs I've put on the air over 26 years. So I guess I'm getting close to 1 call sign a year. So I guess I'm about due to change again. But operating in different environments will teach you different lessons. But as I go through the rest of this talk, I'm going to draw off some of these stories from operating in various places or just going around the country and meeting with other amateurs. But before I get into kind of the meat of it, I do want to give everybody some updates from headquarters. I always try to make it a point as a staffer to let you know what's happening in Newington. Obviously, after 2014 centennial celebrations, and convention was not just, that wasn't the only part of it. There were 6 regional conventions. We had W1AW on the air from all 50 states and a few territories. We had W100AW on the air. So basically January 1, 2015, most of the staff took a nap. It was a busy year for us. To give you an idea on the volume involved, I had talked with Joe Karsha, NJ1Q, he's a station manager at W1AW. And I asked him, I said, how many QSOs of all the W1AW, W100AW stations made this year? So we had about 110 W1AW portable operations plus W100AW. The estimate, and it's a rough estimate, is 3.5 million QSOs in 2014. There's some discussion that we may be calling Guinness Book of World Records on this one. Needless to say, in 2015, we'll be 3.5 million requests, because that's going to be the next step. But the Centennial Convention and the QSO party and everything that went along with it, kind of all wrapping up. And there were, I'd say it was definitely a banner year for headquarters. We've seen, I know just from my perspective as well as others, and I know Kay Craigie, the league president, has said this, we've seen more people re-engage with amateur radio because of this celebration. It was amazing how many people you'd talk to on the air that said, I've been off the air for 10, 15, 20 years, but I've heard about this centennial celebration and I just had to get back on the air for that. We've got more people re-engaging with amateur radio, but that also means we got a lot of people that have missed out on what happened since they were last on the air. So it's, in some ways, it's kind of like having a new flood of technicians come in where you're getting folks caught up to speed with what's going on with amateur radio. With the centennial year closing, one of the things that is wrapping up, and I want to give you a little update on this, the QSO party is wrapping up, but with that means that the logs, if you got on the air, and we did the show of hands earlier, how many people this year got on the air and called CQ Centennial? How many of those said, wow, that's a heck of a pile up? It was surprising. I got on the air a few times from a few different places, and just me personally, I think I did over 10,000 Qs this year. And I've heard that others, Mark Wilson, our product review editor, he made it a point, he wanted to win it all. He wanted to be the top dog in it. And I think the last I heard was something along the lines of 90,000 QSOs this year. It was an amazing opportunity. But it also gave all of us the opportunity to do something unique, and that is earn the old Worked All States Award, but using only W1AWs. Did anybody get the clean sweep all the states? Got a couple. The certificates are ready. I actually got to see the first draft of them, and they look really nice. Where also certificates are going out. If you submit it into Logbook of the World, you got points. You can go into the leaderboard and take a look, see where you're at. There will be certificates going out for all those that I think it was a minimum of 1,500 points, which really doesn't take much. Pardon? No, the minimum to get the certificate. Yeah. So those will be going out. And last I heard, the deadline to submit the Logbook of the World is January 15th. So kind of moving on to some other updates, but a bit more from the Aries area in my area. For many years, there's been a publication from the league called the Public Service Communications Manual. It contained 2 manuals within it. One was the Aries manual, the other was the NTS manual. The Programs and Services Committee of the board directed us to take the Aries manual and rewrite it. It hasn't seen an update in about 25 years. And you can imagine what all has changed in 25 years that will affect that manual. I mean, something as simple as an email address was just not a common thing when that manual was written. So the Aries manual, we've had a working group of about 6 guys from around the country, all either section managers or former section emergency coordinators, and they have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we're getting close to the final draft. It will be presented to the board in a couple weeks, but I imagine this spring you'll see it come out. And a couple of the unique features of the new Aries manual. One is it's just the Aries manual. The program, or the Public Service Communications manual that was the 2-in-1 will not exist after this. There'll be 2 separate manuals and just left at that. The second thing is that Aries messaging, the group recognized that Aries messaging has fundamentally changed since the last time this was written. Obviously there's tactical messaging, just simple, here's a note, pass it to so-and-so, and that's it. But there's also formal messaging, which we've always recognized as the radiogram as our template for formal messaging. But for those that have worked in an emergency management environment or in a disaster environment, know that the ICS 213 form is the common messaging format used for a lot of served agencies. And we're recognizing that, and that's kind of the preferred messaging format in the new Aries manual. The radiogram is still recognized as, it will be out there, you are going to encounter it, but we got to get up with the times with what our served agencies are doing. And we're also including other ICS forms that support that messaging format in there. So that's one manual that's getting updated. The other one's the Emergency Coordinators Manual, and most people don't even know this thing is out there. It used to be printed, and when you became an EC, they'd mail it out to you. We haven't printed it in about 15 years, and I think the last update was probably when the Aries manual was done. We're in the process of getting a group together here in the next couple months. It'll start the update of that as well. And one of the things that we're gonna do with that is to develop companion media training for new emergency coordinators. So when you become an EC, there will be, it won't just be here's the manual, have fun, but it will be videos, instructional material in a variety of formats, so you got a better grasp of what you need to do as an EC. In 2014, the league signed a memorandum of agreement with FEMA, and that was done at the Centennial Convention in Hartford. This MOA took about 2 years, start to finish, to make it a reality. And now that it's signed, the real work begins. We've been meeting with FEMA regularly to see what specific projects can the league and FEMA cooperate on. And we're still kind of early on in this, but we also recognize that we may be working with a deadline. The relationship between the league and FEMA can change somewhat when an administrator changes. We know that a presidential election's coming up. There is a chance that the administration of FEMA could change, so we really need to capitalize now on this good relationship we have with them. One of the projects that we're working on, most of you have heard, if you've kind of kept up, especially in the last couple months, with the news feed from the league, Skywarn Recognition Day, a very popular event the National Weather Service and the league have been doing for many years. And the whole point, it's not really a contest, just an activity period where National Weather Service forecast offices go on the air. You try to work as many as you can. There really isn't a point structure or anything like that. It's just an activity focus. We're discussing with FEMA the idea of EOCs on the air. And the idea is that emergency operations centers at all levels, local, through federal, tribal, state, also what we call our VOAD partners, Red Cross, Salvation Army, and so on, that they put their EOCs on the air as a chance to showcase the amateur radio service to emergency management and other disaster response personnel. Still kind of working out the details on it. We're hoping it will roll out in October of this year in coordination with the simulated emergency test weekend. And FEMA's already on board. We're just working out the kind of how it's going to work. It will be basically modeled off Skywarn Recognition Day. It's an activity period. Everybody gets on the air. It'll be a very simple exchange, not really designed as any kind of contest, but just an operating activity. So that's one area coming up. The other area that we're looking at is training. That's one of the points of cooperation between the league and FEMA, is that we want to look for common training opportunities. But the first thing we're taking a look at is the EC1 course that the league has offered for going on 15 years. And since I've been at headquarters, I've made the case over and over again that the #1 problem with the EC1 course is the cost of it. If I was an EC or an ARES member or an SEC, I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't pay that much money for that course. The price is prohibitively high. And I've been trying to make that case over and over again, but with FEMA now looking at ways we can cooperate, that's become a top priority on the redesign of EC1 this year. So what our goal is we want to actually reduce the price to 0 and make it available for everybody. Along the way, we'll do an update of content as well, because the goal is we want to make it kind of that base standard, no matter who you're volunteering with, whether it be emergency management, a VOAD, or a public safety entity, that this is the base level amateur radio training to work in a disaster. We've got commitment of support from several state emergency management directors, from FEMA, from National VOAD. So we've got the folks on board to do this. The challenge now is going to be cost, and that's, the course does cost the league something to do. We have to host it online. We have staff that administer it. So we do have to figure out a way to do that, to bring in that money to make that available. So we're going to look at things like, maybe going to our donors or going to a corporate sponsorship. Once we get the cost to 0, FEMA will not only say that they recognize it, but it will be kind of given somewhat of an endorsement. They can't put their seal on it, but they can provide that in the list of recognized training on the FEMA website. So that's kind of our goal over the next year or so with the training. And also one other headquarters update. For those that work in the field organization, you're probably familiar with the report forms that get turned in to your EC, your SEC, section manager, or to headquarters. These report forms don't work, to be honest with you. They just don't. Just on the ARES side of things, these report forms, we only hear back from 20% of the sections. That makes it very difficult for us to say we have this many ARES members and we do this much good work with only 20% reporting in. Now this problem, the reason for this problem, there's many. Part of it's the headquarters side. These report forms are not designed to be easily submitted. That's just the start of the problem. Second, in the last few years, a lot of sections have developed databases to collect ARES information within their section. The problem is that information doesn't get shared with headquarters. And then the third problem is, and we're trying to put a bigger focus on this now, at headquarters, we don't have the staff or the resources to actually process the data that comes in any reasonable format. So this year, we're starting the process of going through those forms, with the short-term goals being to update the forms, make sure that all the information is current, and also to make sure that they're all formatted the same way. So that way, when you go to look at this form and you hit submit, we're getting the information in the same in a common format. And also, we're working with one of our former SEC that is developing a mobile app for these forms, so that you can put it on your tablet or your smartphone and just submit right from the field. But this will, if we accomplish these things, that's great, but we've still got to work on that processing side at headquarters, and we're working with the IT department to figure that out. So that's kind of the quick version of what's happening at headquarters. And if it looks like I'm trying to send text messages up here, I've set a timer for myself so I don't go too long. I found it's considered rude if the speaker just waits till people start falling asleep to realize they've talked too long. So the heart of the presentation today really is a little discussion about lessons learned in 2014. I realize that I may be the emergency preparedness manager, but I've mentioned I do DX, I contest, I operate the satellite. So the presentation may have a bit of an emergency preparedness ARES theme, but I will try to kind of cover some of these other areas. Obviously the biggest thing in 2014 was the centennial, and particularly the on-air activity associated with the centennial. If you look at DX clusters, or you were on the air just about any day, You could hear somebody calling CQ Centennial. You could hear a W1AW portable somewhere. You could hear W100 AW on the air. The Centennial was almost omnipresent 365 days in 2014. And it was amazing to see what that kind of on-air activity really showcased about amateur radio. One is it gave many clubs, organizations, and individuals a great chance to demonstrate amateur radio in many ways. They could go to their EOC, put that station on the air, call CQ Centennial, and show. We did this actually at the Voice of America club station just 3 weeks ago for the 10-meter contest. We put W1AW Stroke 3 on from Washington, D.C. The administrator of FEMA sat right next to me, and for the first time since he became a ham, really listened to what a pile-up sounds like. And you want to talk about somebody who was impressed. Now, I had to take the opportunity after about an hour, and we were running at a rate on phone of about 3 a minute. So after about an hour, we had quite a few in the log. And I took the headphones off. I said, Craig, you want to go? And after hearing that pile up, he went, I think I'll watch for a little while longer. But he did point out two things to me that, if you've been a ham for a long period of time, you may not think about these things. But he listened, he said, in listening to that pile up, he goes, there's two things that struck me. He goes, man, he goes, some of those stations were loud. He goes, I thought they were standing right next to me. I said, those are the big gun contest stations like K3LR and W3LPL. Yeah, they're going to be loud. They were designed that way. He goes, and the second thing is, how did you hear some of that? It just sounded like noise, and you're pulling out call signs right and left. He goes, I couldn't even hear them even when they were the only one talking. I said, that's years and years of doing this. You'd learn to listen. Later on in the day, a group of us went out for lunch, and he joined us, and he kind of hinted on this during his centennial keynote in Hartford, but he really kind of expounded on it a bit more. He goes, that's good training. That's really good training to work a pile-up. He goes, you got to be accurate, you got to be efficient, you got to be quick, and best part in the contest, you're going to be told how quick, efficient, and how well you listen through your contest score, or more importantly, your error rate, which a lot of folks operate contests for a score. I operate contests for an error rate. I want my error rate to be as low as possible. And really that is a good way to develop your traffic handling skills, your message handling skills, and most importantly in what we do, no matter what your pursuit in amateur radio, your ability to listen. That is absolutely key. The one thing that was touched on in several editorials over 2014 and also in a lot of online discussions was the pile-up behavior. And I heard all sorts of pile-up behavior. From the not so offensive of calling out a turn or not calling when their call area is called, to the completely offensive of people intentionally QRMing, tuning up on frequency. One guy cussing me out on 30 meters for a little while, and on 30 meters. He did. Well, actually, there was one that used phone on 30 to cuss me out. But yeah, we had one particularly bad QRMer that seemed to be pretty active all year. But the two things that this tells us about this pile-up behavior that we've seen, and we've also seen a lot of very good pile-up behavior, and what really stuck with me was good pile-up behavior from apparently newer hams. And you can tell if you use contest logging software and you type a call sign in and it doesn't show up in that master call sign database, they're probably new, they haven't been on for a contest or something like that. And those were the ones that really stuck out to me. If they didn't show up in that database and the pilot behavior was really good, that really said something. But it tells me a few things. One is we were under the microscope in 2014 with pile-up behavior. We had a chance to pull everybody out of the woodwork. Everybody gets on the air. More people have been on the air than any other year. But we're also going to pull out all the bad with the good when we do that. This behavior exists even when there isn't something as big going on as 2014. The second thing is it demonstrates training opportunities. I am the #1 proponent for training on just about everything. But if you've got a new ham that wants to do things like this, wants to contest, wants to DX, pile-up behavior is something to train them in. For those that have been doing this for a long time, you got a new DX or a new contester, take them under your wing and teach them how to behave in a pile-up. It is absolutely critical. And kind of a last thing about the on-air activity is I learned a little bit about setting goals. When 2014 started, I think we all knew it was going to be a kind of a banner year for on-air activity. First thing I did is I set a goal for myself, an uncomfortable goal for myself. 6,000 QSOs by the end of the year. That's 500 a month. And January, February went okay. By March, I was starting to get burnt out. I went through about a 2-month, I was like, do I have to get on the air? And I kept reminding myself of that goal. But I found that as the year went on, and I kept working towards that goal, a couple things happened. Even after 26 years of doing this, my operating skills improved, my listening skills improved, and one of the best things about it, I mentioned getting all these folks out of the woodwork and back on the air. I got to reconnect with a lot of hams I haven't heard in a long, long time. And one of them was on New Year's Eve, the very last day of this. And prior to joining staff at headquarters, I was in Mississippi. And a very good friend of mine down there, Fred Race, W8FR, he used to be a top-notch 160 operator, called through that pile-up. Now, Fred uses nothing but wire antennas that he builds himself. He does have a kilowatt, but he lives on top of a 600-foot hill in northeast Mississippi. And I stopped the huge pile-up of, it just sounded like a wall of people calling. And it was good to have that little chat with Fred right at the end of the year. That happened, or similar things happened to a lot of folks in 2014 of getting to reconnect with old friends on the air. And a lot of reconnecting even at some of the conventions that happened in Hartford and around the country. Folks were coming out to celebrate this year. So where do we go from here? What is the next big thing? 2014, that's a tough act to follow right there for amateur radio. It's a really tough act to follow. But one of the things that we recognize, and we've seen this through the conventions, through Hamfests, through the activity that our members are doing, amateur radio is unique in that there is the hook into amateur radio, and they tend to be about a 10 to 15 year cycle for these hooks. I know what really got my family involved was scouting. In the 50s and 60s, scouting was a big way to get engaged in amateur radio. In the 70s, there was the CB craze, and a lot of folks came in through that. With 9/11 and Katrina, as we all know, the world fundamentally changed with those events. And a lot of folks came into amateur radio because of emergency preparedness, because of disasters, and so they can be ready when that big one strikes their neighborhood. But we're starting to see the shift again. We're particularly in amateur radio, and I think some of the legislative efforts and the education efforts that are going on are really showcasing this, the next big shift. And for all those interested in public service and emergency communications, this is something to start taking a close look at. The next area is the experimentation, mesh networking, the do-it-yourself projects, and things like that. Of all the spectrum that amateur radio uses, and if you ever think about the spectrum that we have at our disposal, is massive, absolutely massive, and worth billions of dollars to those that would look to take it away from us. But the spectrum that's under the biggest threat is that above 1.2 gigahertz, UHF and above. Now, contesters and DXers long have had our foothold pretty squarely on the HF bands. And to a certain degree, the lower VHF bands, 6 and 2 meters. The area above 1.2 really has two groups that can put it to the best use. One is the experimentation do-it-yourself projects. Things like one of the big hot button items now is the UAVs, drones, things like that. Mesh networking being another. But public service, ARIES, this is a goldmine opportunity to put these frequencies to use. Now, granted, as you get higher up, equipment becomes a bit more harder to come by, but we need to be taking a closer look at these. And technologies, things like D-Star, that's using 1.2 for data transmission, and other similar modes, they're recognizing this. These are the frequencies we need to be focusing on, and we need to be capitalizing on interest in things like setting up an internet network when the system goes down, setting up a mesh network or an intranet in a neighborhood when disaster strikes. One of the things about communications in a disaster that several government organizations have recognized over the years is that it used to be the most important things to provide to a community when disaster strikes: food, water, shelter, and medical care. Communications has now been pretty much ranked right there with food and water as absolutely critical. And it's not communications in, I'm a ham, I'll send the message for you. It's, I will help you communicate like you normally would. The idea of ad hoc mesh networks in a disaster area are absolutely key. That ability for a disaster survivor to still send a text message to their family to say, I'm okay. If you show up with something that looks like a radiogram going, I'll fill this out for you, what do you want it to say? They'll look at you funny, guaranteed. But if you say, I can flip a switch and we can have this mesh network going on, and we got a Starbucks that does have internet connectivity and we can use that as that pipeline out, that will get folks' attention. During Irene in Connecticut, one of the best ideas that came about had nothing to do with passing traffic or radiograms or anything like that. One grocery store in Danbury, Connecticut had a solid internet connection. They had power, and they could stay open. They invited folks to come in, and they did two things for them. Well, actually three. One was, go ahead and help yourself to a cup of coffee. Two, we'll let you charge your cell phone here. And three, the manager would get on the PA every once in a while and tell everybody what the latest news was, what updates there were. We should be paying attention to that as hams. Whether you're an Aries member or not, we should be paying attention in a disaster area, setting up those ad hoc mesh networks, charging stations. We have a technical skill set. It's not just operational. We have a technical skill set that we need to be putting to use during a disaster. And helping a community communicate as they normally would. What does a disaster survivor want more than anything? A return to normalcy. We need to be working towards that goal. Speaking of working towards the goal, at the Centennial Convention, pardon me, I'll just check the timer here and make sure I'm okay, on track. At the Centennial Convention, ARRL Vice President Rick Roderick delivered probably one of the best speeches I have ever heard in my life during I think it was the Thursday lunch. And the gist of the presentation was leaving a legacy in amateur radio. 2014 has come to an end, and one little pet peeve I've got is when a lot of good work is done to make something happen, you shouldn't forget about that work. You shouldn't waste the momentum that was built. You shouldn't let the momentum die. We're in 2015, the QSO party is over, the celebrations are over, and we're starting our second 100 years. Hopefully more than that. We need to make it our New Year's resolution to work towards that legacy. What will Ham's 100 years today say about everybody in this room? Did we lose a fight that we should have won for Spectrum? Did we not keep, granted, it used to be ham radio was cutting edge on technology. Even big computer companies have a hard time staying ahead of the technology curve now. But did we keep relevant in a technological sense? We need to make it our New Year's resolution, particularly in 2015, to build on the momentum that we gained in 2014, to use that to create the legacy. There's a challenge to headquarters to build that momentum. That's our job, to keep everybody going, to keep us all moving forward. There's the challenge to every one of you, your individual legacy. I think about when Rick gave that talk, I think about that term of legacy and the individual legacy and who came to mind with that. And I think of my Elmer. I actually was lucky enough to have several, but one in particular, a guy named Don Gross, W9KQD. Don was my Elmer when it came to DXing. And if it were not for him, I never would have DXed. There were two DXers in our local club. Don was one, another guy was Phil. They were about polar opposite in personality. Don was a very amiable type, friendly. He loved to teach others, and he had a great way of doing it. Phil was an old curmudgeon and somewhat smug about it. And I think it was about 15 or 16, we were at Dayton one year, and there was some big expedition on, something along the lines of, like Navassa coming up or something like that. And Phil asked me, well, did you get whatever expedition this was? I was a teenager. No, I was doing teenager stuff. I said, no, I missed it. He goes, don't worry, you'll just never get another chance. And of course, not something you tell a 16-year-old. Don came to me and he said, Mike, he goes, I'm going to tell you two things. One, he goes, don't let Phil get to you, and remember this, you're going to outlive him. You're going to get to work stuff he'll never get to work. and through that coaching, my interest in DXing stayed strong. Actually, it grew over the years. That's the kind of legacy you want to leave. The legacy isn't remember how important you were, but how you helped your other amateurs improve in their pursuits within the amateur radio service. The amateur radio service, to me, is without a doubt, whether you call it a hobby, a resource, an avocation, a service, it's unlike anything else in the world. I cannot think of anything else that gives us the ability to do so much, to serve our communities, to gain a technical education like no other. Think about all you've learned about radio and communications technology because of amateur radio. And really, just as important, and maybe even more so, the ability to foster goodwill, whether it be internationally, in a region, in a state. And I always call back to one of the early stories of public service and amateur radio was the Midwest floods of 1913. Primarily affected Ohio and Michigan, right in that what they call the tri-state area. Amateurs came out, set up communications capabilities so the towns in the affected area could talk to one another, and basically formed a network that went from about that Detroit area all the way south past Toledo. Now, if anybody, sometimes this joke gets lost regionally, but for those that know that area, I see a Purdue shirt back there, so I know somebody will get it. That was also the first documented case where people from Ohio and Michigan talked civilly to each other. And in another story from an international level, I mentioned going down to Curacao a few years ago. Some of you may know a broadcaster for Radio Havana, Arnie Coro, CO2KK. I grew up listening to him listening to shortwave broadcasts, and I was absolutely thrilled to have the chance to meet him while I was down there, and not only get to meet him, but really kind of build a friendship. We had breakfast every morning together. My first encounter with Arnie was when we all arrived at the hotel, and of course, with the island declaring independence, there was a huge military presence, a huge police presence, and a military helicopter flew past, and Arnie, without even seeing it, rattled off the make, model, and nationality of the helicopter. We all kind of looked funny. He says, "You got to remember," he says, "I was Cuban military and I was a pilot for a number of years. We were trained to recognize the enemy when we heard them, and we never thought of it. The Dutch military was the enemy to Arnie." At breakfast throughout the week, Arnie and I would talk, and we had a couple projects that we worked on together during the week. And I'll never forget the conversation that we had right as he was leaving the island. And to give you an idea, there was a hurricane hitting Cuba while we were all at this meeting. Arnie was trying to gather supplies in Curacao that he could take back to Cuba because he knew that his home would be affected by it. And we were helping him gather up everything from toilet paper to, we had some, cash because, even in Cuba, an American dollar or a euro can go a long way. We were helping him gather all this stuff up. But the very last conversation I had with him was he was getting in the car to head to the airport. He goes, Miguel, it's been a fun week and we've done a lot of good. I said, yeah, we have. He goes, but remember, we're still enemies. The goodwill that can come through amateur radio it surpasses so many things. It surpasses ideologies, nationalities, race and religion, and every barrier you can think of. Amateur radio has a fraternalism like no other. So, in conclusion, which I always say, I'll never say in conclusion, but at least that way you know that lunch is, I think, am I standing between anybody and their lunch? You're about to get it. The seeds of our legacy for the next 100 years have already been sown. It is our duty now to grow the legacy individually and collectively. Let's use the spectrum. I've always said that's the most important thing. There's a great line, and feel free to steal it because I stole it from somebody else. What is the most important piece of paper you'll ever get as an amateur radio operator? Most would say your license. That's the second most important piece. It's your first QSL card. That shows you did something with your license. Let's promote the growth of amateur radio locally, in our nation, and worldwide. And let's continue to serve our nation, states, and communities, clearly showing the value of the amateur radio service to those that entrust us with the spectrum that we have, our public. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. If you have any questions, I'll be around. Thanks again.
A great presentation. Thank you, Mike. Gentlemen, thank you much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Gentlemen and ladies, have a nice day. Hey, Mike, come on up. Hold on, 1 minute. Tom KI1U is here, our HRU chairman.
On behalf of each speaker, we present with a certificate from HRU. And to you, Mike, thanks for coming down.
They know what inside already is. You may get people actually from what? You may get paid. Wow. Listen, that's just going to come. I think they will.
Hey, John, you want to get?
I like this idea. You put it on a.
Yeah.
Makes it so much easier. You don't need no stinking PowerPoint.
No. The only thing I need to do is make the font a little bigger.
You put a timer on each section that you want, how long